Hey folks, welcome to Snowpal podcast. Our guest today is Sid Bharath. Sid is the founder of Refound AI, where he helps companies become AI native through audits and agent builds. He runs his entire business using AI agents. Sid, thanks for taking the time to chat.
Hey, Krish, thank you so much for having me on the podcast. I'm very excited.
Yeah, my pleasure. Before we get started, you want to give a quick intro about yourself and what you do to our audience?
Sure, yeah. So I run Refound AI, which is an AI consultancy. We work with companies to understand the operations internally and help them build AI agents and AI operating systems to automate a lot of the admin and manual work that happens.
Perfect. So I think by way of topics, we have like three of them loosely defined. Just going to state them quickly and then we'll get into one of those. AI audit, a framework for helping companies go from AI curious to AI native. That's one of them. How to create an AI operating model for product teams is the second one. The last but not least, the agentic way of working, how to set up your own AI agents to do the work for you. So we'll try to get into as much of all of them as possible in the next 45 minutes to an hour. Which one do you want to get started with? Do you have a preference from amongst
Yeah, I mean,
the
I think
three?
maybe we start with the audit because they're all interlinked, and I think it tells a good story starting from the audit because that's usually how we start as well.
Sounds good to me. Go for
Yeah.
it. Just give us an introduction to that. So essentially, AI audit, a framework for helping companies go from AI curious to AI native.
Yeah. So I think the audit is usually the place where we start working with the company. And it's probably the best place to start working because it helps you understand where your business is at today, right? I think a lot of companies make a mistake in there's a lot of pressure and FOMO in the market to use AI and deploy AI. What does that mean? What does that mean for your business specifically? And you can't just like the reason like so many AI projects fail is you just try to like do something and it doesn't really make sense for your business. So an audit allows you to understand, okay, like here's how your business operates today, and here's where a lot of the work is happening and where most of it is manual or repetitive. And those are the areas where you can use AI to start with and build out automations or have AI agents do the work for you. So having that initial baseline with an audit is really important before you build up to an agentic way of working and building out those AI operating models.
That's a good introduction, right? Thank you for that. And I don't need to be creative here. We are a product company and we have a lot of the challenges that you probably, someone like you, can help out in this context. I'm going to take some real examples, real life examples, and not be creative about my questions. So
Yeah,
let's say we build a few different products at Snowpal. So not going to the details of those products here, but let's say we do some B2C and B2B work. And most recently, we spent a lot of our time on building APIs so other businesses can integrate them and build software in quicker time at cheaper cost and go to market sooner. Right? That's just a 50,000 foot overview. Now, let's say a company like us says tries to engage with Sid. What would be those initial steps? How do you discover what we do? Because it's a company that's been in business for a while. You have a few different products. There's legacy stuff, that's current stuff. The roadmap shows where we want to be, what we're working towards. The polyglot ecosystem, if you will. We use different languages, different cloud providers. So, just stand business as usual for the most part. I just want to know what would be some of those initial things that you might do to discover what you just mentioned there.
absolutely. Yeah. So the first thing is just to get a good understanding of currently how you're building these products, right? So who's on the team, who's building what, and what does that process looks like from coming up with a new feature idea or a product idea to actually shipping that product to your customers and deploying it and collecting feedback on how they use it, right? And that involves me talking to you, talking to other folks in your company, and really trying to understand what does your day-to-day look like? What are you doing? How are you doing it? What tools are you using? What is the process? What is your workflow? And that's kind of where a lot of those insights into where AI can help come from. If I see that you're spending a lot of your time maybe writing product spec or reading tons of different like research documents, right? Then maybe that's an area where we can help you synthesize that research a lot faster or generate those product specs a lot faster so that you have more time to think about the strategic angle or the creative aspects of building that product. So
Okay.
that's kind of, yeah.
So we're going to dig deeper, right? As
Yeah,
deep as we can go in here.
let's do that.
So that gives me a sense. Now, let's say a typical software team. The nature of typical is changing by the day. The
Yeah.
composition of these teams is changing by the minute as well, right? The teams don't look like they did like 2 years ago or even a year ago. So let's say a team let's just take one of our teams that's building APIs. Now we build these APIs, we make them available on AWS Marketplace, and people can license those at a cost, right? Commercial licenses. That's the core software that we build. But what you mentioned there also, said, correct me if I'm wrong, is how do we go about building what we are building? How do we define requirements? How do we gather them? How does that software development lifecycle work from within the organization? How it's changing? Which parts of it are dated, others are not so dated, and where improvements can be made? So there's a lot of different things you can solve, right? You could actually ignore the code base in entirety and figure out how Christian team are working, or if they're working efficiently in getting to writing the code. But the other part could be you ignore everything else we do up until the writing of the code and tell us how to write that code faster, better, using tools and technologies, or even ignore that and go further beyond and say, you know what, now I don't know how you're building this, what the process is. I don't honestly care what kind of code you guys are writing, but we do care that you need to do X, Y, and Z before you start shipping this code, socializing this, communicating this to the market, creating content around it, right? I'm just taking a high level breakdown just to see how do you figure out where you want to keep your focus on, because every company is unique. All of their
Hmm.
challenges are different. Sometimes even us working in the company, we sometimes you have an idea, other times you're not exactly certain. So how do you dissect this? And because it's going to be different from one client to another. So if you could just walk us through, that'd be pretty good.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, yeah, exactly. For every client, there's like a different way they do things, and there's different bottlenecks, right? And so it really depends on like where's the primary bottleneck in this whole thing. And when you think about like the overall development of a product, and you have maybe multiple people touching that product, it's not just software development of writing code. Before that, there's like maybe there's a product person or a product strategy person who's looking at customer signals and turning that into product specs, right? Then maybe there's a design team that takes a product spec and creates a prototype. Then the engineering team takes the prototype and turns that into product. Then there's a data analytics or QA and testing team that tests that. Then it goes back to the product team to ship it, and maybe product marketing to communicate to that to their customers, right? So this whole kind of flow of building a product, shipping it, getting the feedback, and then iterating on the product. There's different people, different teams, and for different companies, there's different bottlenecks. And so maybe in your company, you might say, we have a really good way of like building products. Like our engineering team is great. They ship fast. They close bugs quickly, or they don't have a lot of bugs, whatever. But figuring out what to build is the bottleneck. We don't have like a good way to collect customer signal. It takes too long to look through all the customer feedbacks that's in Zendesk and Intercom and Slack and NPS surveys and call notes and social media. And so our product managers are kind of like spending way too much time on this, and they're not able to come up with good product ideas. That might be the bottleneck for you. And that's where we can focus then. We can talk to all of these product people, product managers, and go, okay, what tools are you using? How much time do you spend on it? What does your process look like? And let's try to like figure out where we can save a lot of your time in creating those PRDs or understanding customer signal, right?
Okay. So let's that gives me an idea. Now you're trying to two parts to it, right? One is you ask the client where their bottlenecks are, what they recognize as issues that they might have, where they need to see improvements. But on the other side, what if we don't tell you anything? Would you? It's harder because sometimes as a company you're biased. You think you're doing some things better than others, and by us actually telling you, we might not be doing justice to what you probably want to be doing. So how does your engagement typically work? Do you have your clients tell you what their issues are, or do you like, what, don't tell me anything, let us go discover how you're doing things and where improvements could be potentially be made?
Yeah, usually it is that case where the company doesn't really know, especially at a larger size company. They typically don't quite, the leadership that comes to us and says, hey, we want to use AI, we just don't know where. Leadership tends not to have at larger companies that deep of an insight into the day-to-day workings of their employees are different in the process, right? So that's when we say, okay, look, we'll take a look at everything, and then we'll figure out for you where the bottlenecks are. For smaller companies, typically they tend to know, but we can still take a look at everything and sort of like validate whether that is the bottleneck or maybe the bottleneck is elsewhere. But what we'll do in either scenario is we'll actually have a look across the whole department. We'll look at your product managers and the work they do, and then the engineering team, and the QA team, and the design team, and the product marketing. And we'll talk to everyone, and then we'll kind of like say, okay, like we've found various friction points and bottlenecks across the whole thing. and here's how we can solve it with AI agents.
So how do you quantify that? Like, you know what I mean? If there's a team of, say, I don't know, let's even take not large teams, but not terribly small teams as well. Let's say you have a team of, I don't know, 20 people, for instance. Now, again, this is 20 people. That's a lot of people, right? That's 800 human hours per week. They are doing n number of things. You know, people are doing different things on any given week, but let's say the week you get started with, how do you tell what they are doing that they need improvements on? In other words, are you going to be watching people do? I presume maybe not. Or what kind of tools do you use to tell what is Krish actually doing in the 8 hours that he's working that he could actually be doing in 3 hours, and he's actually not as productive as he could be? Because there's a subjective side and an objective side to it. If you could just speak through both of them, because I can see how challenging this can potentially be. Because I mean, not everybody is receptive to sit looking over their shoulders and see how they are going about doing things. So how do you collect metrics on what they are doing so you can tell them that they could be doing things different?
Yeah, exactly. I think like there's a it's uncomfortable if you someone is just like watching over your shoulder. B, it's also the fact that we're an external consultant coming in and we're looking at auditing the way
Right.
you work. And obviously there's like fears of AI taking over jobs. And so people that would probably be a little defensive about that. What we do is it's kind of like it's it's just like a 1 hour conversation. And so with anyone on the team, we will book a meeting, and sometimes I do this in person, sometimes on a Zoom call if we're in different locations or remote. But the idea is I just sit with you and have a conversation and just try to get like the kind of broad strokes of your day to day, right? So I may not be able to really dig too deep into what you're doing every hour of every day, but I'll definitely have a good understanding by the end of that 1 hour of what your work looks like and where you tend to spend the majority of your time. Because we've done this so many times for different companies, we'll also know like, okay, like there's certain patterns that form across it. So we kind of know like for engineers, this XYZ thing takes up a lot of time, or for product managers, it's typically like, doing the customer research or creating PRDs and stuff like that, right? Or communicating between teams. Those are usually where some of those friction points are. And for you, we can like maybe if those are the same friction points, then that's good. But otherwise, if you have different friction points, we can like dig in a bit more. But the idea is I'll come in, I'll talk to everyone on the team, or my team will come in, we'll talk to everyone on the team. We spend an hour with each person at least. And we're also just having a very conversational session with them. It's not really, sometimes they'll actually like open up their computer and share with us, here's what I do all. And this is like the problem that takes most of my time, right? For some people, there's a very clear thing that they do every day or every week where they're like, I hate doing this, but I have to do it. And it takes up so much time. Can you fix it for me, right? And those are the easiest one. For others, it's like, yeah, I do a bunch of different things. Here's what I do. And then I can look in and kind of just like ask questions about, okay, how long does that take? How much time do you spend on that? And get a decent idea of like where's your time going. And so it's just really conversations, and that's how we do it.
So is there a bit of an irony here, Sid? Because the idea here is to make them more efficient by introducing AI into the mix of things, but the way in which you arrive at that seems very human,
It is.
labor intensive.
Absolutely. I think it's there's a bit of an irony, but also is a bit of our philosophy of the future of work and what is human work and what is AI work, right? I think I've seen a few companies, like their funded startups are trying to solve this through AI voice agents that do the same thing. So an AI voice agent will talk to the employee. But I know like if I pick up a call with an AI voice agent, I'm not going to go as deep into that stuff, right? But when I'm sitting with someone in a room and I'm starting with like a very warm and friendly attitude and a smile, and I'm explaining, hey, look here, we're not here to replace your job, and we're here to do XYZ thing and like get rid of the boring parts of your work so you can focus on more creative and strategic work and build a rapport with that. That's something only a human can do, at least right now. Maybe in the future, AI might take that too. But I do think that the future of work, there is AI is not going to take over all jobs. There's going to be so many jobs, some new jobs coming up, and some existing jobs that are become even more important, where it's like human to human conversations and sales and some kind of like strategic work and creative work where humans are still needed. And so you know, uh, yeah, a bit of irony, but also a bit of our philosophy of this is definitely a job that is suited more for a human than an AI, and everything else is suited for an AI.
Okay, so let's say Can you give us an example of a scenario, right? A particular role, somebody you had worked with, and maybe it's a product manager, maybe they were a salesperson, maybe a developer. What were some of the things that you identified, in general, right, as something that they were doing not as efficiently as they potentially could have? What would be an example of that, and how did you go about identifying or breaking that down into more concrete line items so you could start making recommendations? And last but not least, what were those recommendations for them to actually take upon so they could actually make those improvements?
Yeah. So I can do uh, sales if you want, because that's
Yeah, you
that's
can. I
everyone
mean,
knows how a sales team
sure.
runs. Yeah. Okay. So typical, like, your sales team is, you'll have multiple people in a team, but it's like you have leads that come in, or maybe some teams also do like outbound and cold email. But once those come in, they book a call, a discovery call, get on with the salesperson. Then the salesperson needs to create a proposal, book the next call, pitch the proposal, then create the contract, update the CRM, all of that. So there's a lot of tasks that, say, a sales team is doing, where some of it is the core value generating work of getting on a call with a lead and turning them into a customer, and some of it is supporting work, where you create proposals or presentations and pitch decks and follow-ups and update CRMs. Typically, like, oftentimes you think about it, I spoke to a sales team just last week, and they were saying, yeah, a lot of our sales people are spending at least a couple of hours a day. So out of your 8-hour day, a salesperson is spending 2 hours doing a lot of that admin work of updating a CRM and creating a proposal and designing a PowerPoint, or creating a report, right? That's 25% of the salesperson work is just going to this admin kind of work, right? And so that's where we say, okay, wow, that's a huge opportunity, because the salesperson themselves don't want to be doing that kind of work. It's a little boring for them. It's they love doing the sales conversations. So how can we get back those 2 hours for you to do maybe another sales call, right? If that's what you want to be doing, right? And so then we can say, all right, let's take away the stuff that you don't want to be doing. At the end of a call, you have this transcript. You're now going into your Salesforce CRM and updating it based on the transcript, and then you're creating a proposal. You're taking existing templates and then duplicating it. So some of that work is already automated, but it's still work that you have to go do yourself. If we can create an AI agent that automatically detects the moment you finish a call, it checks the CRM to see what stage that lead is. If it's an initial discovery call, it then knows it should be creating a proposal and updates the CRM accordingly. It takes a transcript automatically and then updates the CRM and generates a proposal from it. And then it emails a link to the proposal, or pings you on Slack to the sales rep and says, hey, I just looked through your call transcript. Here's the sales proposal, and the CRM is updated. And all of that happens within seconds. So
Makes sense.
instead of the 10, 15, half an hour the salesperson may have spent doing this kind of stuff, instantly it's done for them, and they can just send that and move on to the next.
That's a good example, right? So we're talking automation there. So that's a good segue, actually, dig a little bit deeper into that part of our conversation. So what you're saying here is, when you're talking about a sales team and a sales engineers working on their day-to-day tasks, there's a number of things that they do, but there are things that they don't necessarily probably want to do or enjoy doing, and it can be automated. So you're trying to identify those avenues for automation, right, that lend themselves
Absolutely.
more gracefully to be automated. Now, let's say you define the problem domain there. So your core objective here, Sid, is then to create those AI agents, right? In other words, when you engage a client and you're talking to them, you figure out what you need to fix and how you need to go about fixing it. Is the end outcome of what you're producing AI agents that you actually create and give to the clients, hand it to the clients and say, hey, you know what? We worked with you for X number of days or weeks or months, and these were the AI agents that we created for you. Is that the goal that you're working towards?
That's basically the goal we're working towards, yeah. And then we want to also say, like, okay, look, we realize that your salespeople spend 2 hours a day on this kind of admin work, and now we have AI agents that do it for you, and now you've got back those 2 hours a day for each salesperson, right?
Perfect, right? And then
Yeah.
let's say there's a few things I want to talk about there. One is, how do you go about creating these? Like in that example of the sales optimization, what are some of the tools that you are using to create these AI agents?
Yeah. So it depends. Sometimes, most of the time, it's like we're building these AI agents where we have like some sort of agentic harness, or like we use Python a lot, or we use some like agentic agent SDKs that are out there. Google has their own OpenAI, Anthropic, and then we'll use the API as well, right? So we are building a custom connector. We're building this agent that runs on a server, and then every time there's some new, say, a sales call is done, it is, a webhook that calls that agent and says, hey, process this, and here are the instructions to process it. Here's a template that we use for a proposal, and it goes and does that, and here's the artifact that comes out of it, right? So we build kind of like all custom built for the company, and then we can either host it on your servers or our own servers and manage it for you.
Okay, so you talked about a few touch points there, right? You mentioned Slack as one of the touch points. Let's take that as an example. I've talked to a few founders, Sid, where they are actually in the business of doing something along these lines, but not through a human integration. In other words, their whole platform is essentially for companies to be able to identify areas of automation and use those tools. So for somebody who's trying to figure out, hey, should I go look for these tools that are out there? Because there are tools available to connect connectors for sales, Slack, for Salesforce, and whatnot. So how do you differentiate? Like, what is the moat that you tell that you bring to the table to your client?
Yeah, the core moat here is like it is very specific to your business and the way your business works, right? And so you could get an off-the-shelf solution that automates it for you, but if you're spending something that only automates 80% of the way there, and you still have the 20% of work to do, you're still spending a lot of time on that, and you're still losing money, right? And so the core idea here is like, okay, that's why we start with the audit. So we really understand the way you work and how your business works, and then we can create this agent that knows your business and has access to the context of your business to output it specifically the way you want it. And also, like some companies will have like data privacy issues and so on, and so obviously we can build it within your own servers and your firewalls, so that a point solution may not have that option.
And so you mentioned you have the option to either host these agents in your infrastructure or have them run on the client's network. What do you see is happening typically with the clients that you're working with?
It kind of depends on like the type of client. Usually we see maybe smaller clients will typically use our own servers because they don't have that infrastructure built out. And larger clients, enterprise, especially when you're looking at, say, health tech, healthcare, financial services, those typically will have their own, because that's like sensitive data, PII and such.
And if you are managing that, like say if they don't want to run it in their infrastructure and you do it for them, how do you manage the data? I'm presuming you support like multi-tenancy. How do you keep the data separated between the various clients that are using that you're working with to create these agents for?
Yeah, it's all separate servers, right? Like each client gets their own like server, gets their own instance. There's no like cross contamination.
Do you want to? We can talk a little bit. We don't need to get in the weeds of it, but if you could just explain how that looks like visually, or for us to imagine, that will actually be helpful. Let's say we can take two clients, right? Snowpile and somebody else, and you're creating like what are typically those? What are the number of agents that you create? Is it like one, two, five? I know it depends, but just to imagine what that architecture looks like on your side. And the reason I ask is also to tell because you're trying to identify commonalities between problems, I reckon, right? You mentioned that earlier, because if Snowpal has a problem you identified, it makes more sense as well, right? For you folks to identify the commonalities so you could repurpose your agents. So I'm just trying to understand how unique these agents are, or are the problems common enough? In other words, are you looking for the same type of problems because there's enough of those so you don't have to rebuild the agent every single time, but you have actually a core agent pre-built, and you might make some tweaks and adjustments and modifications to those to suit the nuances of a client, but not so much build an agent from scratch every single time, because I'm just wondering if that model might scale or not scale.
Yeah, great question, right? And I think that's kind of like what we're going for as well. And we've come up with this thing as we do more of this. We're trying to extract what's scalable and common, and we've come up with this concept called the AI OS, so the AI operating system. And essentially, what it is it is an AI agent that runs on a server, right? And it has access to your business context, which we have extracted from the audit, and we've turned it into context files. So a context graph and context files of your business, and this agent has access to it, plus access to your various tools that you use in your company, your product management tools, your GitHub, your Salesforce, and so on, right? So it has access to all these tools and has access to the business context that we've created for you. And then we can create custom tools for it to do things, to create an artifact, to create a document or a presentation or even a code base. And then we integrate it into your existing interfaces. So you may be using Slack as one interface, so you're using email. Sometimes we may build like a custom UI. We try not to do too many of those. But the core idea is like this core agent and the tools that it has, the connectors it has to various tools, as well as the connectors to interfaces like Slack or email. Those are components that we can ship across all companies. Right? So that's common. What changes is the business context that each agent has. That changes the behavior of that agent to work for specifically your business. And so those are the processes that you have and the workflows and your SOPs and your business data. And so we encode that and we duplicate that agent, pre-built agent with all the connectors and tools. And then we can create custom workflows or jobs, right, that these agents do autonomously. So, you could communicate with the agent at any time and it has access to your business context and all your tools and it can go do work for you. But if you find yourself doing a certain type of work every single time, for example, at the end of a call, you have to turn that into a proposal and that's repeated. We'll build out that job that the agent runs and it basically picks up every new call and turns that into a proposal. And then you can just communicate back and forth with the agent to tweak that and to push it out.
So how does the client have visibility into the agents that you've created? I mean, a few things there. I want to ask about the manageability of these agents, the maintainability of these agents, the governance of the agents as well. But let's start with visibility. Let's say you built a few agents for Snowpal to make our lives better and more efficient. How do we get insights into how many of those agents are actually currently running, what their status is, and the health check on those agents? I mean, is there a platform that you provide for us to be able to log in and check how our agents are functioning?
Yeah, it comes, everything is all built in terms of like the logging, and as every time the agent takes an action, it gets logged into a database, and then, we can either log that to one of your existing databases or something else.
No, actually,
and
said
then,
even one step before, even before logging. Let's say you created 6 different agents for Snowpal. How do I know where those agents are? Like, do I get do I log into I'm imagining a system where you show the agents, whether there's a green or a red, the agents are working, they're not working, they're down, they're all right, or what they're actually doing. Do I get a visual interface into the collection of the agents that you've actually created for us?
that's a good one. We haven't really like built that out. We could possibly. That's an interesting thing to do. Yeah.
Yeah, no.
Because we do. I mean, we're hosting it we're managing it, and what we're saying is like it's doing work and it's always running, and we're always making sure it runs, right? And we don't have the ability for our clients to just go and look at it because typically most of these clients are non-technical, so they don't really know or understand what they would be looking at, right? And what we say is that we're managing for you. We internally have an idea of what it looks like and whether it's running and whether it's performing well. And then we're collecting feedback from the customer who's using it in their day-to-day when they interact with it on, say, Slack or via email, or it's running those automations. They can tell us, hey, it didn't do it this time or it didn't work. And then we figure out what's going on in the back end. So we're essentially like on-hand tech team that's looking at it, and we don't give the client that interface to debug it themselves because they usually don't know what to do.
Okay, so let's talk about the governance. Now, see, the thing is, I've talked to a number of people recently with, if it's a human, it's hard enough to figure out if they are doing what they should be doing or shouldn't be doing. But when it's an agent, it's n times harder, like whatever that n happens to be. So there is a lot of concerns and questions, genuine questions around the security around these AI agents, because if one of them goes rogue, it might be, if you don't detect that quick and soon enough, it could cost you in many different ways, right? It could cause a lot of damage. So how do you govern these agents? Let's say you're going to work with multiple clients and each of the clients has an agent doing specific activities for them. Surely it's not humanly possible. I don't reckon that you can have a bunch of humans looking at these agents and as to what they're doing. So how do you govern these agents to say that, hey, you know what? I created 6 agents for Snowpal. These are the checks boundaries for what the agent should or shouldn't do. And if they end up doing something differently from what you expect, because I'm presuming your agents are depending on these LLMs and whatnot, which means they are probabilistic, right? It's not deterministic, meaning you could do the same thing 3 times, and each time the action could be quite different based on what it thinks it needs to do. So how do you handle the governance of these agents?
Yeah. The number one way, the best way to handle it, like, because really what you're trying to do here is make sure that the agent doesn't do some sort of take an action that is damaging to the business or irreversible or whatever, right? And the number one way to solve for that is to have a human in the loop whenever it's taking an action, right? So we could also classify certain types of actions. So like a simple action like logging its own behavior to a table, that's fine, right? Like the agent just logs its own actions. Another one of
No,
maybe
but let's say
generating.
the agent, sorry, the agent does, the agent logs what it does, right? Let's say it can log to glory, but unless there is a way to watch these logs, which again is not humanly possible because it's going to write a ton of stuff to these logs, you have to have another system, perhaps another agent, a metadata agent, if you will, right? You're creating a bunch of agents for a client that does solve real problems for them. But I'm just thinking aloud here, right? You almost might need a metadata agent which looks at these agents to see if they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. Sure, there needs to be a human in the loop. I'm just trying to wonder if they're writing to a log, how are you watching those logs to tell, and what are you looking for in those logs to tell, hey, if it's doing the right things or if it's actually going rogue?
Yeah, and like again, we have agents that will look at the logs, right? So log is basically just new data in a database, and our agent connects to that database and just like lets us know, hey, here's what the agent did, right? Now, typically, you're not really looking, you don't really need to look at it on a regular basis unless something goes wrong. Then you look and you say, okay, here's what went wrong. So, but we also have the checks and balances. So, like, hey, there's human in the loop. So the human is always making sure that whatever the agent does is passing through some sort of human review, and if they review it, great. When something comes through where the human says, nah, that doesn't look good, or the agent has made a mistake here, fortunately, again, human in the loop, the human can abort the process at that point and it doesn't do any irreversible damage. But then we can then look at the logs and see what went wrong in that process to then fix that so that next time it doesn't happen. So the human in the loop is always kind of like the stop that determines whether this process continues or not. And then if something is going wrong, the human decides, hey, something's going wrong, let us know, and we can like look at the logs and figure out what's happening.
Sounds good. We are halfway through our podcast. I have a few other things to ask you about things related to what we talked about, but just outside that realm. But to give you a breather, maybe you can ask me anything you want to ask it. That way you can catch your breath, and then I'll come back to my next set of questions to you.
Sure, yeah. Well, I'd love to understand, like, also, like, how you are using AI agents today at Snowpal, or because we spoke a little bit earlier about the way you're building products. So, what are you doing with it, and what are you sort of exploring?
Sure. And ask me any others you want to ask as well, right? So one of the things, right? We have a few products, and I said one of the things is the B2B APIs that we built. So we have like 8 different APIs right now with, I think, 1,400 some endpoints, right? So it's a pretty large set of APIs and endpoints. We build them for humans to consume, right? So it's RESTful integration. You can go get an API key on AWS Marketplace or just purchase a license and actually run it in your infrastructure. It just depends on how you want to do it. And you can start building your software without having a backend team necessarily, right? You don't have to build a backend at all because a lot of those building blocks are already pre-built and given to you. So you can build your mobile app or your web app or your microservice and in quick time at really cheap cost using a bunch of AI tools and our APIs, right? That's where we have been at. What we are currently working on is, as more AI agents come into the mix of things, it's not humans necessarily who are actually integrating in our endpoints. So you have agents that actually want to be able to consume and write software by integrating the Snowpal APIs and the endpoints within those APIs. So what we are working on currently, Sid, is working on a model context for an MCP server. That way, other agents can consume our APIs without having, humans can do it as well, right, through a RESTful integration. But our current focus is making that MCP server available so other AI agents can actually start consuming our APIs. That's on this side. But on the other side, now we could go tell the client, hey, build your own AI agents to consume our APIs through the MCP server. To go one step further, we have also started at early stages to build these AI agents that consume our APIs through the MCP server that we are building in our network essentially. So then we could actually give not just our SDK and the documentation to our clients to be able to build software around our APIs, integrating APIs. but they can actually now use the AI agents which we've pre-built for them to start integrating as well. Now that's those might serve as samples for the most part, but that's the idea, to add these two layers, if you will. Add the MCP server on top of our APIs and add the agents. The agent would be on the client side because they need to call, the MCP server to consume our APIs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. Yeah. So I mean, like, I guess the goal now is you're really trying to start building more for agents, right? And like making it
Because
easier for
all of
agents
us,
to yeah.
funny you should mention that, because someone asked me not too long ago. One of our products is a project management platform, right? It's snowpal.com. You can go in and manage your projects and whatnot. Someone asked me, if we were to redesign that user interface, how different might it look? And my answer was not like, hey, it's going to look a little bit different. It's going to have to look fundamentally different, right? That's
Yeah.
the UI that we see in future. I think Salesforce release mentioned in those news over the weekend that they are
Yeah.
actually probably going to go headless with their tools. I'm not surprised. And we happen to
Yeah.
be in the business of building APIs, but I think that's what the future is going to look like, because I don't think the traditional interfaces are just going to cut it anymore for two reasons. One, it's because it's not just humans who are using these websites and applications anymore. And two, even when there are humans using it, you're now getting used to more like the Claude way of interacting or the Chat GPT way of interacting with tools, that you don't want to go to a traditional user interface and say, you know what, oh, what do I have to do? I have to go to one page and then the next page, and then it tells me what to do. That's not what you want, right? You want to probably have a conversational interface for the most part. I mean, you might still have dashboards, but you're going to have to draw a fine balance between what should be dashboards, what should be the traditional user interface and the user experience, versus what should actually look like Chat GPT. So you go into a project management platform like Snowpal, and as opposed to it telling you what you might be interested in, you actually start asking what you want to be doing. Hey, it's Monday morning. You have a question, you stick something into the prompt, and it's going to have to come up with those answers exclusively curated for you, Sid versus Krish, as opposed to the same interfaces for everybody, right? So I think,
100%.
I'm not seeing a lot of those tools necessarily. I don't know if I can think of any examples, but I have to imagine that either folks who are building new user interfaces have to do it that way for the most part, or a lot of other people, like we have our own platforms that we built from a few years ago. We're going to have to rethink how we've done that and sort of make the adjustments. Sometimes you can make tweaks to it. Other times you're going to have to drop the ball and rebuild from scratch, right? Because it's sometimes not easy enough to fix what you've done.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's a great point about like the UI, right? Like user interfaces, it's a user interface. It's for humans. It's an interface for a human to deal with like data
Right.
and a database and stuff, right? Like the agent doesn't really need that interface because it can just do it directly via an API or MCP and make those decisions. So yeah, I think we're going to see more and more of that kind of stuff where if you are a company like Salesforce and you're not creating those APIs to make it easier for agents to use your product, then maybe another company that does will eventually win the market. Salesforce is probably too big right now and like very difficult to unentrench, but maybe for like more smaller like or mid-sized SaaS companies, that's a real danger for them, where if your entire value is the interface, then the interface is going to go away. What is the value left over that you're providing? So
No,
yeah.
yeah, and it's a moment of reckoning for, even if you look at Salesforce and how they have performed. We are working on a fintech API right now, so some of us spend some time in the stock market more than we sometimes want to, but to understand the real pain points, so we can actually build them into features into the API that we're working on. So part of the podcast said is we also talk about finance and micro and macro and whatnot. You mentioned Salesforce. They've done extremely poorly over the last half a decade, and specifically very poorly in the last 12 to 18 months. They've done a little bit of catching up in the last 2 weeks, maybe a little bit, but it is a moment of reckoning, right? I mean, you're not going to be able to charge by the number of seats. As more agents are going to come into play, companies that actually, the typical SaaS companies that charge by the number of seats are going to have to go to maybe usage-based pricing that's more specifically targeted to AI agents integrating and consuming their offerings and whatnot. So there's going to be a fair number of changes that we can hopefully expect to see.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah,
Anything
makes a lot of
else
sense.
you want to ask me?
No, I mean that was great. That was it was good to get your
Okay, then I'll
thoughts.
get back. We got another 15 minutes. I'm going to get back to the last set of what I want to
Sure.
ask you, right? Now,
Yeah, yeah.
as you and your team build this, right? You're working with clients, you're engaging with them and doing this. how are you doing things differently from how you've done it in the past? Because your whole job, the business, is to make things efficient for other people, but then you're probably making yourselves more efficient as well using the same recommendations that you might give other people. So what are some AI agents that you've probably created for your own teams that make your lives better and more efficient?
Yeah, so we have our own internal refound AI operating system, and that is an AI agent that sits on a remote server, and it connects to our various business tools and our team Discord. We use Discord instead of Slack, and emails, right? So it connects to our Google Drive, emails, our database. Um, we have like running a small business early, right? And so there's a lot of different moving parts to that of like getting new clients and doing the sales calls and closing them and sending out contracts and then delivering on the work and then supporting the clients and building out those AI agents and so on. So that whole you know, plethora of work that we have to do, all of that is done by AI agents, or most of that is done by AI agents. I'm the only like human work is just me getting on a podcast like this or getting on a discovery call with a client or doing like an in-person audit interview with an employee. Everything outside of that is like we've built AI agents to do the rest of it. So when I'm doing those, when I have an internal call with my teammates, an AI agent sitting, collecting that, turning that into social media content and marketing content. When someone books a call, the AI agent tells me who's booked the call and gives me some research so that I'm prepared for the call. When I finish the call, the AI agent picks up the transcript, turns that into a proposal, and then drafts an email, and I could just go look at the email and say, yes, let's send it. And then every morning, the agent tells us in Discord, like, hey, here's the state of the business. Here's the pipeline. Here's what tasks that need to be done for XYZ client, for all these clients. Here's who's doing it. And then we can also hand tasks to the AI agent. When I do an audit interview with an employee at a company, the AI agent collects all those audit interviews, turns that into a presentation based on our templates, and then we can present it back to the company. So all of the work that does not involve me being in front of a client or a customer or a podcast or whatever, automated already through AI agents. And so we're a small team, but we're able to like work with it like dozens of clients at a time and like big companies as well.
Lovely. So our audience is predominantly an engineering audience, for the most part at least. It's changing slowly but surely with more business people as well, but for the most part. So one of the questions that I always ask, because it's of interest to our audience, is the tools that you are using. What would be like in an average week, Sid, what are some tools that you're using that you could recommend to us? For whatever it is that you're doing, what are some tools that you actually are currently using?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like I spend all my time in the terminal pretty much because we have like all these AI agents built. I don't actually log into any tools because the AI
Okay.
agent is access to them, right? So we got rid of HubSpot because we built our database internally, and the AI agent does that automatically. Gemini to automate transcripts, and then our AI agent picks that up, so I don't have to go log into to Drive. Our agent connects to my Gmail, so I don't need to log into Gmail, and then it can generate like invoices and contracts. Yeah, what other tools? I mean, Cloud Code is my number one driver, really. It's Cloud Code and our custom AI agents that we built, and that's it. I don't log into anything else. I use my terminal is Warp, or we use Discord. Those are the only tools I've like cut down all the other tools, just handed it over to the agent so that I don't have to look at those tools ever.
Okay, makes sense. And let's say when your team is building these, right? One of the other things, how much of code that your team is writing for the work that they're doing is actually code that they are humanly writing versus code being generated. Like if you were to give a ballpark number of the percentages out of 100 lines of code that say is being written by your team and team members, what percentage of that do you think is actually written by humans versus the rest being wipe coded and generated?
It's like 95% AI generated.
It's incredible, right? So, in other words, this is the same thing I'm hearing from a lot of the folks. So, the obvious follow up question is, are you then looking to hire developers at all for what you folks want to get done?
No, not. I mean, not necessarily. Like, it's not even. I think like we want to hire as we grow. If we we are. I mean, I'd say it's less developer, but someone who's technical and can translate business requirements into agentic work, right? So to take
Right.
those business requirements of a company and like what they need in an AI agent and work with something like Cloud Code, for example, to build that out into an actual automation or an agent. Though that's the kind of skill. So like it helps to have like a technical background, I'd say, but you don't have to be like a really like, you know, 20-year plus software developer. I don't think you can still be like someone who's had like maybe a couple of years of software development experience. But if you've had a lot of experience working with Cloud Code and actually shipping things with it, then I think that's like a very valuable experience, right?
Okay, so it's interesting, right? I mean, to be honest, I've been doing this for like 20 years, literally, or more. And I've never said that there's anything that I would do that you need 20 years of experience doing, because a lot of us have been doing this for a while. Never, hopefully, right? Maybe some of us do, but not, hopefully, not all of us end up doing the same things over long periods of time. So when you have 20 years of experience, it really, you only have 2 years of relevant experience to the problem you're currently solving, right? So we've never actually, as
Yeah.
a company at Snowpal, looked for that particular skill. That's not a metric that we go by. Sid does not need to have 20 years experience. If Sid has 2 years of doing that, then Sid's good enough, right? I mean,
Yeah.
we probably can do everything else we can do. But the thing I want to ask you is, so you're talking about, you're in the business of providing software services, correct? So that's what you're doing. You're helping people become efficient, but then you don't necessarily have a need for a developer, right? So we are in an interesting point of time in life, because I don't know if we could have said something like that 2, 3, 5 years ago. Certainly not when I started my career, right? So now
Yeah.
you're able to build these teams and provide software related functionality and services without actually having a developer, which is kind of bizarre to me, but I know I can see where that's coming from, because in the past, that was the fundamental tenet of building a software team. I mean, I speak of this as a developer myself, but even otherwise, you had to onboard a developer at some point, maybe after you got the money from your venture capitalist or who was investing in a company, or your bootstrap funded, but you still had to find somebody who could write that. But that's not a need anymore. So what are we talking about the composition of a team going forward? So as you see it, you used to have three developers, say maybe a part-time tester, a part-time product manager, maybe a part-time bunch of other part-time people, and some full-time developers are working and building that software. That is a fairly traditional team composition. What is it looking like from what you're seeing at your organization and at the clients that you work with? How has, do you see developers, do you see more of some other roles that we've not heard of in the past? What is it looking like?
Yeah. So I'm gonna like, I saw this tweet by Boris Cherny, who's the guy who created Cloud Code. And Anthropic have very famously, especially Boris himself and the team at Cloud Code, have very famously said that 99% of the code is AI generated, and they're trying to get to 100%, right? And they very famously said that we don't need engineers anymore, and yada yada. And then someone tweeted saying a screenshot of their Anthropic hiring page saying, "Hey, you're hiring for engineers. Like you said yourself, and you're saying that Cloud Code writes its own code, so it's all 100% automated almost. What is the point of engineers?" And so Boris responded saying, the engineer's work now moves to understanding the user requirements and turning that into instructions for Cloud Code to build. And so that is essentially, I think that to me, that sounds like a technical product manager, right? Someone who's able to bridge the gap between what the market wants, what a business needs, what a customer needs, and instructions to for the AI to go and build that thing and to support that need, right? And I still think like, it's still very important to understand how code works and how tech works, how software works when you're building with, say, Cloud Code, because you can then give it your input of like what is the architecture you want, right? Like how do you want the database to be designed? How do you want like to, if you're creating a session with with an AI agent, how do you want that session to start and stop? Like if you're creating sessions from a Slack conversation, is that session per channel, per DM, per user? Is there a shared session? Like those like little architectural decisions, the AI can absolutely make those decisions for you, but it helps for you to understand so you can direct based on how you're operating to give it that feedback and understand what that means in terms of like what the agent should be doing. So I think there is still a need for developers, but that role is going to be look more like a product management role or a technical product manager role. I also think that the product managers themselves are going to become, if they can't learn how to learn how to work with AI agents and coding agents, they might become irrelevant if a so there's like from both directions, whether you're a PM trying to be more technical or a tech or a dev trying to be more product managing. Those are the two directions you could go. And I also think that design is very important, like design, um, a designer, the role of a designer, because that is where you capture the taste, you know, that a lot of language models don't quite have. They tend to default to the average, to the mean. And so if you have someone with a really good design sense and design aesthetic, not just front end design or interface design, but also design the interactions and design an agentic behavior, that is a very important skill to have.
Okay, so I'm hearing, it's interesting because when I ask this question to people, there was a certain period of time where the answers where I could see consistency between random people, right? That have nothing to do with each other. But it's kind of interesting because in the last 2 months, the answers I've been getting and have actually been pretty spread out. It spans the spectrum. So, I think, nobody knows sees the crystal ball. But I think we have to sort of wait this out because on one side, even I'm split in my mind. There are days I think I don't need my engineering skills to solve a problem. And the other days I feel like if I didn't have some of those skills, I would take a lot longer to solving those same problems. So it seems like a sort of a dichotomy or whatever the right word there is. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we really don't know what's going to happen, right? I don't know what will happen in 2, 3, 5 years, like what's going to happen. But all I know right now is like this is happening right now. Like this AI is building stuff, and like in many companies, including multi-billion-dollar companies like Anthropic, it's 99% AI generated. So it's happening already. You can't deny it, and I think you need to like understand how it happens at the very least if you want to like be more relevant in the
Yeah,
future.
I mean, just to add to that, right? But there are repercussions as well because Amazon had more than two outages, if I'm not wrong, a few weeks ago, and they attributed all of that to code being generated. So they required
Mhm.
that it had to be approved or reviewed by a senior engineer. So if you didn't have that person, then you would be in a bit of a trouble. So I don't know. I don't know either, but from what I'm understanding and hearing, Sid, is you might have a number of these tools that are in production today because it's so easy to create these. I mean, you can hop on Lovable and spend 2 hours on it and build something, which means now that's become the baseline, right? Everybody can do it. So that's not a skill anymore. So the part becomes everybody can build software. Now, how different are you in being able to build that software? Because earlier, if you could write code and someone else couldn't write code, there was a difference. But now that seems to not matter anymore. So you have to be able to tell. And when people ask me, hey, what's going to happen to developers when AI is writing code? I feel like the question's valid the other way around too. It's undeniable that you could replace developers with code being generated. But at the very same time, it's not any more difficult to replace every other role in that same team with all of the tools that we have available. So now the developers have more power themselves. They don't necessarily need a product manager, a DevOps engineer, a sales engineer, because they can do all of that using the tools, right? So we've got to become like a jack of all trades to some extent, supposed to be the masters of the trades that we wanted to be the masters of.
Yeah, no, to your point, I guess, of like, Amazon, I think there's a difference here between someone who uses Lovable and we'll call that vibe coding, where it's a non-technical person who's just saying, hey, go build this thing to me, and the AI does all the building, versus when you're looking at the way Anthropic uses Cloud Code to build Cloud Code, they let's call that agentic engineering. And that is more where the agent is producing maybe 95, 99% of the code, but the human is still reviewing it. And the human is making sure that this code makes sense. This is not going to cause any bugs or issues and stuff, right? So there's still like human and developer involvement, and that's where the developer skill comes in, where like there's still checks and balances there, and it's not just like being vibe coded and just like sent out without any checks. So I think
Makes
that
sense. Yeah.
that's kind of like the way it works right now, and it should work. I think if you're trying to get into this, you have to understand that you still need some developer knowledge and coding knowledge to be able to look at what's happening and make the call as a human whether this should be put into production or not.
Fair enough. I'm going to let you have the closing comments, Sid. But before that, last question to you. What's your favorite? If you went out to dinner and you had to place an order, what would be your order for an appetizer, entree, and dessert? Just one dish.
Yeah. Great question. I think for an appetizer, probably maybe like a little dip, like maybe some sort of hummus and kind of dip kind of thing. So that's
Okay.
nice. For entree, steak, I'd probably go with steak.
Okay.
And then dessert, something with chocolate, maybe like a chocolate mousse or chocolate ice cream.
Okay. Sounds good to me. I'm going to let you have the closing comment. Before that, any other last questions for me?
No, I mean this is great, and it's such a good conversation, and really enjoyed being on the podcast, Krish. It was great to be here.
Oh, no, thank you for your time and all of your thoughts. There's plenty for each of us to learn, in this journey in the next few months or years to come, right? So, again, folks, I'll include the link to Sid LinkedIn profile and Refound AI. Definitely do check that out. Again, thanks, Sid Bharath, who's the founder of Refound AI. They've helped companies become AI native through audits and agent builds. So, Sid, I'm going to let you have the closing comment and then we can call it wraps.
Yeah, I think that if you are listening to this and you found the conversation interesting and you'd like to chat, feel free to reach out to me. Always looking to help more people adopt this agentic way of working and start to build and work with AI agents.
Perfect. Just stay on the call for a minute or two. Again, thank you so much, Sid. Appreciate your time. Folks, until next time, bye bye.